Room 404 should be empty. That was the first thing the hotel clerk, Rayhan, was told on his first day at the Grand Crescent Hotel. The old manager, an elderly man with a weathered face and shaky hands, took him aside and whispered, "If anyone asks for room 404, tell them it's under renovation, and never open it." At first, Rayhan thought it was a joke. The hotel was old, sure, but it had been recently renovated in parts and business was steady. Nothing about the place screamed haunted, at least not in the daylight. But as the days passed, he noticed strange things. Guests who stayed on the fourth floor often complained of noises at night, soft whispers, a rhythmic tapping, and sometimes a faint crying sound that seemed to drift through the walls. Rayhan would check the hallways during his night shifts, but they were always empty. Still, the complaints kept coming. It was on his third week there when he met Mr. Shah, an older guest with tired eyes and a hollow voice. Shah was polite but insistent when he checked in. He slid his ID across the counter and said, "I need room 404. Rayhan stiffened. "I'm sorry, sir. Room 404 is under renovation." Mr. Shah smiled faintly. "No, it's not. You and I both know that. I need that room." Rayhan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. The system still listed room 404 as vacant. The manager's warning echoed in his mind, but Shah's stare was unwavering. Against his better judgment, Rayhan handed him the key. Later that night, Rayhan sat at the reception desk, unable to focus on anything but the key that was missing from its place. Hours passed, and everything seemed quiet, until the phone rang. He answered, expecting it to be Shah asking for towels or room service. But there was no voice on the other end, just static, and then, very faintly, breathing. Rayhan hung up. He stared at the screen showing the feed from the old security cameras. On the monitor, the hallway outside room 404 was empty. But then the door creaked open. A shadow crossed the threshold, moving oddly, as if it were dragging something behind it. Rayhan grabbed his flashlight and hesitated only a second before heading up. The fourth floor was colder than the rest of the hotel, and the silence pressed down on him like a weight. When he reached room 404, the door was slightly ajar. He knocked softly. "Mr. Shah?" No answer. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was freezing. His breath puffed out in front of him as he swung the light around. There was no one in the bed, no sign of luggage, but the window was wide open, curtains flapping in the wind. And then he saw it, scratches. Long, deep gouges on the floor, leading from the bed to the closet, as if something had been dragged. Rayhan swallowed and crossed to the closet. His hand shook as he pulled the door open. Empty. But then he noticed something carved into the wood inside. Words scrawled over and over again in jagged letters. "Don't let me out." A loud crash behind him made him jump. He turned. The bed was overturned. And standing in the corner of the room was Mr. Shah. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. "I thought I could help," Shah whispered. "I thought I could free her." Rayhan took a step back. "Who?" But Shah didn't answer. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he crumpled to the ground. Rayhan grabbed his arm, shaking him. "Mr. Shah, wake up!" And then he heard it, a voice, soft and childlike, whispering from inside the walls. "Let me out!" The lights flickered. Rayhan pulled Shah's body toward the door, but it slammed shut on its own. He pounded on it, yelling for help, but no sound came out of his mouth. Panic rose like bile in his throat. The closet door slammed shut again behind him. and then it creaked open. Rayhan turned. Something crawled out, something small, pale, and twisted. A little girl, her head cocked at an impossible angle, her eyes black and empty. She smiled. "You let me out." Rayhan couldn't move. His legs felt like they were rooted to the spot as she crept closer. Her fingers were too long, her nails sharp and cracked. She touched his cheek gently, almost lovingly, before her mouth opened far wider than it should have. And then everything went dark. Rayhan woke up at the front desk. Morning sunlight streamed through the lobby windows. Everything looked normal. Guests were checking out, chatting happily about their stay. He sat up quickly, looking at his watch. It was 7 a.m. Had it been a dream? He glanced over at the key rack. Room 404's key was back in place, but when he checked the computer, it showed room 404 as vacant. No record of Shaw checking in, no charges, no log entry. He told the manager everything. The old man listened quietly, then shook his head. "That room has been sealed since the girl died. She was locked in there by her father. He thought she was possessed, left her to die." Rayhan felt sick. But someone was there last night. The manager gave him a long, tired look. Room 404 should be empty. That night, Rayhan quit. He never went back. But sometimes in the middle of the night, his phone rings. And on the other end, there's just breathing. And the faint sound of a little girl whispering, "Let me out." Second story. The Whispering Room. Amir had just moved into a new apartment. It was cheap, quiet, and close to work. Almost too good to be true. The landlord had mentioned the previous tenant left suddenly, but Amir didn't think much of it. The first night was peaceful. The second night, not so much. As Amir was about to drift off, he heard a faint whisper, soft at first, like someone speaking through the walls. He sat up, listening. Silence. Maybe his mind playing tricks? By the third night, the whispering grew louder. It wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the room. Amir, his name, whispered softly, again and again. He turned on the light. Nothing. But in the mirror above his dresser, he saw something. His reflection was smiling. He wasn't. He smashed the mirror, but the whispering didn't stop. Every night it came back. "Let me in. Let me in." One night, exhausted, Amir whispered back, "Come in." The next morning, his neighbors complained. They heard screaming, but when they checked, Amir's apartment was empty. Only the mirror was left, hung back on the wall, and in its cracked surface, Amir's reflection still smiled. And now, every night, if you listen closely, you can hear him whisper, "Let me in."